Hello and welcome to ESMARConf 2021. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So welcome to the live stream. Thanks so much everybody for registering. We are really excited to have so many people register. I think over 480 at the last count. We are going to now just introduce the conference, provide a bit of a welcome, and then we've got a really exciting talk by Matt Grainger. So I just wanted to start off by introducing the organising team. So we joined in the organising team, we have Matt Grainger, as I mentioned, myself, Neal Haddaway, Emily Hennessy, Kira Keenan, Luke McGuinness, and Martin Westgate. And if you want to contact any of us or see what we're up to, you can check out our Twitter handles there or send Emily an email. You can find out more about the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon as well at ESHackathon on Twitter. And I want to just extend my great thanks to the entire organising team for helping put together such an interesting and enjoyable programme. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a few minutes to introduce the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon. You can find out more, as I said, at ESHackathon.org or ESHackathon on Twitter and ESHackathon.org. And the mission of the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon is really to support the development, testing and promotion of new software and workflows in evidence synthesis, to build networks and capacity amongst researchers, practitioners and developers, and to advocate for open principles in evidence synthesis. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. But so far we've had 3 physical events and 1 series of online events. The first event happened in 2018 in Stockholm. We then had a follow-up mini event in Stockholm later that year. We then had a larger second event in Canberra in 2019. And we've since last year been conducting a series of small projects online, which has been quite helpful in the current climate. And you are all, of course, contributing and engaging online, so thanks very much. This is the group of amazing people who joined us at the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon in Canberra in 2019, many of whom are presenting today and tomorrow. And we also thank some of the previous sponsors for our past events. Without them, this work wouldn't have been possible. And I just wanted to put up a quote that I'd had recently from one of the past participants saying that the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon is the most fun conference they've ever attended. Hoping that we can get somewhere near that for your enjoyment of today and tomorrow. But really, we want to support people in the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon working in the sphere of tool development and evidence synthesis. Here are just some of the tools that have been produced during the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon. These are all software written in various different languages. Some of these you'll be hearing more about over the next couple of days. And then we've also had a stream of work focusing on discussions and sort of setting up frameworks and ways of working, maybe as a first stage before the tools can be developed, but thinking about the structures that are needed behind evidence synthesis. And we have one paper in Nature, Ecology and Evolution on a new ecosystem for evidence synthesis. We have a commentary that I'll talk a bit more about in a second on creating and curating a community of practice in evidence synthesis technology, and a paper that's currently preprint under review, ensuring prevention science research is synthesis ready. And when I'm talking about evidence synthesis, I'm talking broadly about anything you might think of systematic reviews, systematic maps, and meta-analyses. So I'm not using that term exclusively, but using that as we're using that as a term to encompass all of these different types of synthesizing methods for synthesizing evidence. So now on to ESMARConf, why you're all here today. We are very much aware that there's a very thriving community working around evidence synthesis and meta-analysis, or perhaps it's better to say there's many thriving communities. We also know that there's a rapidly developing landscape of evidence synthesis technologies, these tools that can support systematic review, systematic map, and meta-analysis. And we know that there is a developing, and we're hopefully part of it, evidence synthesis technology community. We also are very aware that R is really a perfect platform for developing tools because it's very open and collaborative. And what we really wanted to do was to try to bring these communities together, the R communities, people working in tool development, people working more formally in evidence synthesis and in meta-analysis. And so by this conference, we wanted to bring people together. And the objectives, the goals of this conference are to showcase some of the latest developments in evidence synthesis and meta-analysis in R, to provide a platform for networking, sharing, collaboration, and co-creation, and to demonstrate the suitability of R for open synthesis, that's the open science principles in evidence synthesis. So that's really why we wanted to have this conference. This is the first conference of its type. It's the first online conference that the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon has run, and it's also the first time we're running ESMARConf. So we really thank you for bearing with us as we start out and just sort of try to map bits of the landscape in this area. Before I moved on, I just wanted to briefly introduce a concept that I think is really important for this conference and for the principles of what we're trying to get with ESMARConf. And I'm talking about this in a bit more detail in a session tomorrow, and there is a session on open synthesis, but I just wanted to briefly say why I think this is really important. Many of us working with evidence synthesis and scientists in general really appreciate the benefits of open science. And R in particular is a community that is really vital for open science, and the principles of open science are really vital for the continuity and continuation of this amazing work in R. And the similar benefits of open science and importance of open science apply to evidence synthesis and meta-analysis. And this schematic on the right is a draft framework for a concept that we're calling open synthesis, the application of open science principles in evidence synthesis. And some of the draft component parts of open synthesis that help to make evidence synthesis and meta-analysis as a whole, function. And I'll be going into more detail, and so will the other people in that session on Friday. But if you want to know more, there is an open synthesis working group, which has a dedicated website, and there's an increasing body of literature on this. Plugging my own work there, apologies for that. But do come along to session 6 on open synthesis if you're particularly interested in open science. So I wanted to now extend my thanks for, and our thanks from the organising committee to everybody who submitted an abstract. We have an amazing selection of abstracts, and we've also got an amazing, excellent complementary set of presentations that we invited to really complement those abstracts that were submitted. We have 39 presentations in total over the next 2 days. We have 10 panel discussions and 4 workshops. I'm really amazed by this really brilliant body of work, and just want to thank everybody for their brilliant work in getting this to this point. I'm also really delighted that we have a plenary presentation from Vivian Welch. Vivian is the editor-in-chief of the Campbell Collaboration. She's the director of the Method Center at the Bruyère Institute, Research Institute, and she's assistant professor at the School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa. We are having a bit of a change. We're twisting things up when it comes to the plenary. We know that many of you are tuning into this in your own time zone. Time zones don't work for everybody. And right now it's the middle of the night for Vivian. So Vivian will be dropping her presentation at some point in the next couple of days. and it'll then be available online. So Vivian won't be speaking in this welcome session, the introductory session, but her presentation will be available online on YouTube at some point, and we'll let everybody know when. I also wanted to extend my thanks to everybody who registered and everybody who is watching this after the event. So far, we've had around 480 participants register up until today. I just thought it'd be interesting to put a bit of data about where you are coming from. This is for registrants. We asked them in what time zone they thought they would be attending. And so you can see there's a bit of a bias towards Central Europe and Europe in general, but we also have a really nice range of people, a nice range of attendees from different continents. An amazing number of people registered. Thank you so much for taking part, and we hope you enjoy it. We really hope that you engage with the online event afterwards as well. We know that sometimes timing doesn't work, so we hope that the format that we've chosen works for people. So just to introduce the program, and you can find out more about the conference at any point by visiting the link up at the top, including a detailed program. On day one, on today, we have this opening session, following up in about 45 minutes with a first session on automation that focuses primarily on text analysis. The next session is other types of automation. We then focus early on this afternoon, GMT, on quantitative synthesis, and we've got a panel discussion. The second quantitative synthesis focuses primarily on network meta-analysis. We were really excited to get a number of talks focusing on network meta-analysis. So if that's the kind of thing that floats your boat, please come along to that. There'll be some really interesting talks, even if you've never done or read a network meta-analysis before. We then have a final session today on user interfaces. And across today, if you're not sure about, or if you're not particularly confident in your skills in art, there's a real spread of talks, both very in-depth coding ones for people who have a real particular interest in methods and understanding how things work. But there's also talks that are suitable for beginners in art or people who've perhaps never used art before. And you can see from the range of topics covered today that that's the case. So please do engage with the live stream and the individual talks as well. Moving on to tomorrow. Tomorrow we have all the workshops, which I'll introduce in a second. But we have, starting off with a workshop at 7 AM GMT on writing functions and developing packages. We then have a session on reporting and reporting standards. Then have a session on data visualization. And then in the afternoon, GMT, we start with a concept called research weaving. And if you're interested in combining bibliometrics and evidence mapping, then that's essentially what this means. And then open synthesis, as I mentioned before. At 3 PM GMT, we have our workshops, and I'll introduce those in more detail in a second. And then we have a really interesting closing session where we have a panel discussion thinking about teaching R skills for evidence synthesists of the future before we close the session and close the conference. So our workshops, as I said, we have an early workshop on Friday on writing R functions and developing packages. Workshop 2 looks at systematic review coordinating bodies. If you've not heard of that concept before, these are organizations that help to support rigor, publication, training, and awareness around systematic review evidence syntheses that are used in policy. And we have a really great panel here with Vivian Welch, as I introduced already, Jordi Pardo, who's on the board of Cochrane, and we have Jackie Eels and Andrew Pullin from the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence. So 3 different disciplines, health, social welfare, and environment and conservation. So if you're interested in learning how you can get support for doing really rigorous evidence syntheses and meta-analyses, do come along to that one. We then have a workshop on using GitHub, with sort of an introduction on how to integrate R in GitHub. And then we have a workshop on the importance of collaboration in reducing research waste and improving efficiency in evidence syntheses and meta-analyses. So do please come along to that one. Those 3 workshops happening at the same time, but they're going to be recorded and available afterwards. So don't worry that you have to select one. And all of the workshops will be available via the YouTube channel. And questions and answers can be submitted via Slack, or questions can be submitted via Slack. I'll introduce that now. So if you have any questions today, for those of you who've registered, you can submit those questions via Slack, and we've got the joining instructions were in an email for how to join Slack. The Slack community is going to be kept open permanently for networking and for reference for all registered participants, so that you can really make the most of that community. If you need any help and support at any time, you can contact the organising team. Just a reminder of who we are: Neal Haddaway, Matt Grainger, Luke McGuinness, Kira Keenan, Emily Hennessy, and Martin Westgate. We do encourage you to read the code of conduct and be respectful to one another. We're sure you're going to be, we're sure you're all lovely people, but if you want to know more about our diversity and equity policy and the code of conduct, please do consider reading this link that's on the Evidence Synthesis Hackathon website. It's also provided in Slack. As I said, all of the sessions are live streamed, so each session will be a live stream video that you can watch live or you can catch up with later. And then each of the individual talks has been painstakingly recorded by our wonderful presenters, and they're scheduled for release on YouTube. So you can also dive into individual talks without having to move through the session live stream. And those individual pre-recorded talks have closed captions already. So if you'd like to use subtitles or closed captions, the individual pre-recorded talks have those added automatically, and the live sessions will have them added in post-production. If you have anything that you'd like to say to us, or any questions or comments, please do use the hashtag ESMARConf2021 and tweet. We'd love to hear how you're enjoying the conference and engaging with the content. So please do use that. I also just wanted to briefly introduce the Evidence Synthesis Technology Special Series, and you can find out more information at this website, estechseries.github.io. It's a joint special series of papers, commentaries, research studies, methodologies, tutorials that is going to be published jointly between the Environmental Evidence Journal, which is the journal of the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence, and Campbell Systematic Reviews, which is the journal of the Campbell Collaboration. We're really excited that this open special series is going to be publishing some really interesting papers about the use of tools and technology in evidence synthesis and meta-analysis over the next few years. So if you have an idea, please do propose an idea to us via that website. You can read the commentary that introduces the series and find other resources online as well. And we're encouraging and inviting all of our presenters to consider submitting their talks as papers to that special series. We'd also love to know who you think is, in particular, one of your favorite presenters or the favorite presentation. We know that everyone, all of the presentations are amazing, and you'll find it very hard to pick one. But if you'd like to vote on who you think is the best out of a very amazing bunch, please do visit this website, bit.ly/ESMARConfVote, and tell us what you think. So just to say again, welcome to ESMARConf 2021. We really hope you enjoy the next few days. We've enjoyed getting it ready, and we really welcome you to the next few days. So we are going to start off with an introductory presentation by Matt Grainger. And I will hand over to Matt. Matt, hopefully you can share your screen.
Not yet, Neil.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. So as Neil said, this is just an introductory talk really, I think the whole idea for the conference really started way back when we were looking at in Stockholm, when we were talking about talking the first ES Hackathon. And we started to think about what packages are available in R and what do they do, and is there a need for more packages in R that do some sort of evidence synthesis? So I've started off looking in a very broad way, and this is more of a discussion piece rather than anything finalized or finished. But just to get your ideas coming from you and get some things begun to be discussed. So there's about 150 packages on CRAN that are listed as being meta-analysis packages. So that's the CRAN task view for meta-analysis. And it's obviously we're missing quite a few. So packages that aren't on CRAN and perhaps other packages that are used for meta-analysis but aren't labeled as being meta-analysis. But you can see over time, the number of packages has increased, and particularly over the last couple of years, there's been big increases. If we look at the number of downloads versus the year since first release, you can see that there's a positive relationship between the two, that the more downloads you have, the longer you've been around. But you can see some of the packages are sort of outliers. Obviously, downloads is probably not the best metric here, but because there can be lots of biases in it. But however, just as a snapshot, we can see that, for example, up on the top there, you've got effect size, a fairly new package that has been downloaded lots and lots of times. It's a really cool package because it's got all the effect size calculations you can possibly want or need, both Bayesian and frequentist, which is quite nice. Some of the let's say, older packages, the foundational packages, are still doing quite well. So Metaphor is up there, as well as Meta. Meta is really important because it allows data from RevMan to be put into the R package for meta-analysis. Another one there is MetaBMA, so Bayesian model averaging. So lots of these things, there's lots of packages that have been downloaded and used a lot, and then some packages that have been downloaded and not used that much. Just got me thinking, one of the questions I'd like to pose to you, the audience, is what makes a meta-analysis package popular? What makes it useful? Why do you use it? So then we looked at how they're related. Let me just change my screen. Nope. Sorry, wrong buttons. So what you should see there is a network of meta-analysis packages.
Looks lovely, Matt.
I'm glad you can see it because I'm having a little bit of technical problems, but I think it's there now. Okay, so what that shows is both meta-analysis packages. They're the ones in blue, so they're the ones on the CRAN task view, and 546 other packages. There's the ones in sort of the gold color, and basically this is a dependency network. So which packages do meta-analysis packages call when they run functions? And you can see that there's one that stands out quite a lot here. I can zoom in, which is Metaphor. So fundamentally, all roads lead to Metaphor. So a lot of the packages that are going running functions have some relationship to Metaphor. They're running through that. Of these supporting packages, let's say, the biggest ones are things like ggplot, which is this one here. So a lot of the packages are using functionality from ggplot for plotting, for example, and so on. So there's a whole network of different things, different relationships between the packages. I thought it'd be quite interesting to see how these are all related. One of the interesting things, I think, is that even if a package isn't directly related to Metaphor, it's only a couple of steps before it gets back to Metaphor. So, it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting happens through metaphor. And we're back to the presentation, hopefully. So we looked at the package descriptions to see what it is they're doing. So what is it that they do? And I've just plotted out here the n-grams, so the connected words together in those package descriptions. And the weight of the arrow, the color of the arrow, the darkness, is how many times that's reported, that combination of words. So unsurprisingly, 42% of the packages, sorry, were dedicated to running meta-analysis models. So they're just simply running the models. And interestingly, these are for different types of data. So you've got genetic data, survival data, correlations, all kinds of different types of data can be run through meta-analysis, which I think is amazing. 11% of the packages are dedicated to converting different effect sizes. So there's loads of packages that do a lot of effect size conversions, which is quite an interesting observation. 7% look at sensitivity analyses of different types. So there's quite a lot of those. A further 7% are looking at plotting functions. Mostly they are forest plots, but also funnel plots there, but also some new plots that I'd never even heard of coming out now. And as Neal mentioned before, network meta-analysis is really taking off, and there's 6% of the packages there are related to network meta-analysis. So what next? So what I would like to do, if it's something that people might think is useful, is to update the CRAN task view, but add in some non-CRAN packages too. So all the packages that are on GitHub or elsewhere, it'd be really nice to be able to get some sort of directory of meta-analysis packages, and perhaps even in the future, more general evidence synthesis packages. So I've got ecology on the brain this morning. And provide some guidance as to where a user could find a package for their particular needs, if it's a specialist area or more of a generalist approach. We really want to be able to identify the gaps in the functions. So we started to look at the functions, haven't presented it here, but trying to find out what gaps there are. And if you know of any gaps, just let us know, and we can start looking into those. But one of the questions that always comes to my mind is, do we need new packages for those gaps? Or can we just incorporate some of these functions, these gaps into the existing packages? So looking at sort of functional redundancy. So that's why my ecology coming out, but is there a redundancy in the number of functions we have? For example, as I said, there's lots of effect size conversion packages. So do we need them all? Or do we need any new ones? Maybe not. And finally, I mean, the question for you is really, what makes a meta-analysis or evidence synthesis package really useful? Is it one that has really good documentation? Is it one that's just been downloaded a lot, so you find it a lot easier? It's more obvious. Is it more general, more versatile? Is it more specific? So those are the sort of things I really want to sort of start you thinking about now, and then maybe by the end of the conference, we can have a big list of all these things that make a package useful for a user, a meta-analysis package useful for a user, maybe a list of packages that I don't know about, and even ones I do know about, but we have a big list of them so we know where they are, so we can update this CRAN task view with some non-CRAN packages too. Please feel free to send me comments, ideas, packages on Slack or email or on Twitter, any of those. Yeah, I don't know, Neal, do you have any comments and ideas stemming on from that?
Thanks very much, Matt. I'm going to turn on my video and say hello. We've got Martin joining us as well, and some of the organising team might be along too to have some comments and questions. But that was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. I find this work fascinating. I'm always amazed at how much people are using metaphor. I think Wolfgang would be as well, but Wolfgang really seems to be connected to everything and everyone, which gives credit to the amazing capabilities and work behind Metaphor. I was wondering, obviously there is a key interest in statistics and meta-analysis because of the, I guess, the history of R and its use in statistics. But I was wondering if, what your plans were or what your thoughts were around using some kind of framework for the methodological steps of evidence synthesis and meta-analysis more broadly, to encompass things like, the sort of backbone of the program of ESMARConf. So the early stages, maybe the visualizations. I know forest plots and funnel plots were in there, but how do you think you might deal with packages that were perhaps not designed for meta-analysis, but might be an integral part to earlier stages of the synthesis process?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's something that we have discussed about in the past, but it's always that tricky thing of finding them. So I think it's if people are using packages consistently in their work, that they even for a small step in the process, it'd be really useful to hear about that, so we know that they are being used for that purpose. Because searching for these packages that aren't, let's say, designed for meta-analysis specifically is quite difficult. Martin, we've had a lot of discussions about this. What's your opinion on there?
Yeah, we have over time, haven't we? You're right. Finding it is impossible. The universe of R packages is too big for you to mistakenly find things that have application. And it seems to be that the counterpoint to that, though, is that I often find myself in workshops or conversations where someone says, "Oh, have you tried this package for this obscure field?" And I'm like, "Oh, that actually solves a very general problem that I've been trying to solve for a long time." And so it's sort of, that stuff is out there, and there's sort of an immense frustration to it, but also an excitement. And I think the best answer is crowdsourcing. I think conferences like this, and you've got to assume that people will see it and tune in. But it is only through many voices that you get a perspective on it. I guess the follow-on point from that then is that if you do end up even amidst the universe of, what is it now, 15,000 R packages, if you do find a slightly smaller galaxy of the ones that are relevant to you, it's how to find a path through them. And so I don't know if you guys have a view on the sort of pluralism versus being restrictive and saying here's a common workflow. That's the challenge that I find, is that I value R for having so many different approaches, but I also find that challenging. Do you guys have a view on that?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. There's a bit of tension between having lots of options and having too many options. I think one of the great things about R is that it really does embrace the interoperability concept of the FAIR principles, if you're familiar with those. The findable, interoperable, accessible, and repeatable, replicable, I think it is. And I like the fact that you can use one package, but maybe if you don't quite like it, you can always jump out, or jump out partway through, because the data tend to be very easily interoperable. And that's not the case with external software, which might be black boxy or in a format where you can't extract things in the middle of the pipeline. And particularly for evidence synthesis and review management tools, I think that's a concern. So I do like that, and I think that reduces my concern of overlap and lots of different tools. But I also found the network analysis that you did there, Matt, really interesting, because it looks at implicit and undisclosed connections, or not undisclosed, but not necessarily clear, because it looks at dependencies. And I think there are possibly dependencies that people who are using the packages might not be aware of. And so they might be able to do a limited amount with a dependency from another package in a package they're familiar with, but actually the utility of that whole dependency might not be open to them because they might not be aware of it. So you might be able to do a little bit of bibliometrics, for example, because you're pulling in functions from a bibliometric package, but you might not be totally aware of everything that you could do to complement your evidence synthesis, perhaps. So I think that the fact that you have some connection there is better than these tools that don't have any connection externally. But I still think there is quite a lot to be done to raise awareness of packages that are available, and to describe when a package might fit into a pipeline in evidence synthesis. So although I don't think we should be too prescriptive about which packages we use, I think it's useful to be able to point towards which packages have a lot of support and identify themselves in an evidence synthesis pathway. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I would agree with nearly all of that. I think one of the things about R is, so going back to ecology again, so I said I've got ecology on the brain, but this sort of idea of functional redundancy. So R packages often go extinct because people get different jobs and they have different requirements of their lives, so they can't spend hours and hours of their free time working on packages. So yeah, it's having enough redundancy in the system so that if one package does go extinct, doesn't get worked on anymore, then there's some other functions that can take over and like keep the whole process going. So it's having your workflow flexible enough, but maybe not too flexible that you can do everything. I think that's the key. And
I guess related to that is that something I've noticed is that for various job and professional reasons, I've been rather busy and too busy to do much package updating in the last sort of 6 months or a year. And what I've noticed coming back to some earlier code is that the things that I kind of hadn't noticed or paid attention to when they were brand new have become store packages that people use routinely, and that can replace whole chunks of workflows that I had to write from scratch with things that are maintained by other people, which saves me time, but also just better than my code. And there is a niceness to seeing that just enormous degree of professionalism becoming far more common. You know, there's still some things that are quite quickly developed for a single task, maybe for a single project, and that's still out there, and I think that has value. But there's also a lot of people who are putting a lot of really a lot of resources and a lot of time, a lot of effort into maintaining software that has now become infrastructure for my work, you know, that I couldn't live without. And it's encouraging how quickly that can happen. I suspect I'll learn during this conference that there's new things that will quickly join that list of packages.
So if anybody watching, I know there's about a 30-second delay, but if anybody watching has any questions and you're registered, please feel free to put them in the Slack. We have about 7 minutes more. We also have some time that we can discuss while those questions come in. Yeah, I guess it's worth mentioning as well, the systematic review toolbox. The systematic review toolbox is a project that Chris Marshall spearheaded, and it's an online database of tools that can support evidence synthesis and meta-analysis, not just in R, so it's got lots of different tools. And one of the challenges that they have is that a lot of these tools stop being supported or stop functioning. It's very difficult to be able to check to what degree they're functioning, as you mentioned, Matt. But I guess there's just a bit of an encouragement for anybody who's producing a tool in R for evidence synthesis or for meta-analysis to consider making the systematic review toolbox aware. I think they have a submission system to submit your packages there, but that's a great way of making people more aware of your tool, particularly if it is user-friendly for people who don't have a huge familiarity with R and might not find it through R networks. And also if you've got a Shiny app or some user interface, that means that people don't need to use R. It's a really great way of reaching particularly systematic review communities. A lot of people use it. It has a lot of packages in it, and it splits packages up by the methodological step that the tool supports. So I'd encourage people to check that out.
So we do have a question come through on Twitter, Neal, if you haven't seen any others come from somewhere.
Great.
So we've had one from Jessica Dagaran. Thanks, Jessica. Basically asking the question of how to solve the problem of R packages going extinct. You know, is it, so she asks, would it be possible to retain functions in packages that are not worked on anymore? And I guess technically that is possible. The etiquette of it is a little awkward. I'm not particularly familiar with Crown's orphaning policy, but do you guys have any experience with this? Or any feelings about it?
Yeah, I think if there are, obviously the functions will still be there somewhere, and if the code's up on GitHub, then that's really helpful. You can sort of steal, I suppose is the right word, with a citation, bits of the functions. The problem comes is when you're not really a developer of that developer sort of mindset, and you're just a user like me, for example, who uses a lot of R packages, and a lot of the time I don't really understand all the code of what it's doing and why it's there. But so writing my own code based on someone else's code, I sometimes find difficult. So it's when the dependencies break, and that chain of dependencies break. And we saw the network in my presentation. It is the network. I can probably do some analysis on this, but how fragile is that network to a breaking? So if Metaphor went extinct, does that mean the whole meta-analysis universe on R is doomed? So we need to really think about those sort of things. But the functions are still there. So there's plenty of competent people, you guys, who can write those functions and incorporate them into their own packages. But it's a little bit more work and more effort and more free time of people doing it. So no one gets paid for it.
I have seen people make a specific choice to say, look, I've done 20 R packages or something. Far more than I have, for example. It's too much for me. I need to do some different things. I'm going to focus on 2 or 3. Who wants to take over these ones? I remember someone saying, oh, I wrote a package to plot the layout of politicians in various parliaments. It's very niche. It looks nice on election day. Someone will love it, but it can't be me anymore. And I seriously thought, I didn't actually do it in the end, so I'm blowing someone's horn when I should actually have stood in. But it was a nice sentiment, and I think people do have an affection for their work and would like to see it continue, even if they're unable to do it themselves. So, but then again, it's got to be worthwhile, doesn't it? I think where there's a large enough user base, there's usually some expert users who are willing to step in there. And you know what? Some extinction, to use and extend your ecological analogy, then that is going to happen. I think we've got to accept that.
And I'd maybe just add that I think this is one of the things we really wanted to do with the evidence synthesis hackathon, and we're trying, and in some cases really succeeding, is to build a community to support people with packages for functions in evidence synthesis, so that if they get to a point where they can't continue with it, we're able to sort of pass that torch on to someone else, or someone can step in temporarily, or it's very much a team and a family approach to it, so that it's not people ideally working alone producing something that then is not really understood and becomes extinct. It's the genetics are passed down by familial connections, continuing the biological analogy. I think that's what we're really looking for.
No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
How well that succeeds is yeah, I think it varies. It depends how easy the code is to understand, how free people are. And as with all of these things, most people working on this stuff are volunteering. So I think from my perspective as a relatively new coder, trading off the ambition and excitement and burst of energy in coding and producing tools with like how much am I actually going to be able to maintain this is a personal challenge that I really need to think about. So I think there's things we can do as a community and things we can do as individuals to try to tackle that. But it's a really good question. So we don't have any more questions on Slack. I don't think we have any more questions on YouTube. How's Twitter looking?
I'm not seeing anything else.
Cool.
We're up to, haven't tagged us.
We're up to 9:45 local time in Europe. So on schedule, I think we'll end there. Matt, thank you so much for your presentation. Martin, thanks for a great discussion. You too, Matt. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks again to the organising team for the work behind this. And we will see you in 15 minutes for the first session. Thanks very much.